Hi there, and welcome to week 7 of the Bionutrient Food Association Soil and Nutrition Conference. Some of you may recognize that I am not Dan Kittredge. I am Shauna Lyons, and I also work here at the Bionutrient Food Association. And I'll introduce myself just briefly, and then we will get on to our session this week. Feel like that introduction just a little necessary because you might be wondering who I am. But I lived on a homestead in Vermont several years ago and moved to Colorado. This is kind of the intro of how I met Dan and became involved in the BFA. Moved to Colorado, was managing a diversified farm, flew out to Vermont and caught the second half of Dan's 2-day lecture. And I'd like to say that was probably about 15 years ago because there's definitely a line in the sand of life pre-BFA and life after BFA. And so, like I said, I started applying some of those principles and got involved with the Bionutrient Food Association on many different levels, from local chapters to now, hosting events and now working here full time. So enough about me, but I am supposed to be here, and welcome to you all. I'm really excited today and honored to have this opportunity to host session 7. Our guest today is Abe Collins, who is joining us from Vermont. And so I think that was kind of the fun way of tying all that together. I was actually in Middlebury 2 days ago. So had I stayed just a couple of more days, maybe Abe and I could be doing this side by side. And I feel like any attempt at an introduction will not adequately cover his expertise and experience. And what I'm most excited about today is I feel like there's going to be many levels of opportunity to connect and understand, different on-ramps from large scale to medium scale to personal opportunities. So I would really like to encourage people to take advantage of the Q&A section of the conference down at the bottom of your screen. I know sometimes we lose track a little bit of time, but I really want people to ask their questions today and engage on that level if possible. So I am going to mute myself and turn off my video and let Abe come on, and I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you all for being here today. And Abe, as soon as you're ready, come on, and here it comes.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. Thank you, Shauna. I'll share my screen to start and jump into introduction through the process of the slideshow. Call this resource-rich regeneration, and this is about healing our watershed homes. So by way of intro, and why I'm very hopeful about a deep topsoil future that we can all create with our communities, collaborating with each other, is I have been a sheep herder in the desert. I have been a dairy farmer. I have been a beef rancher. I lead a cooperative and a scientific organization based here in Vermont today. And I dedicated myself early in my life to learning how to grow topsoil and increase biodiversity and reverse desertification to turn deserts back into healthy land, but also in every environment. So here we are grazing cows about 2006 or 7 in St. Albans, Vermont. And here I am this is 2000, yeah, about 6, in an organic buffer alongside our farm that we couldn't farm for certification reasons, digging a hole, and there was characteristic of much of the clay soils of what's called the Champlain Valley, 5 or 6 inches of a functional A horizon topsoil underlain by 8 feet of gray blue clay. And here I am about 100 feet away where we had been working. And we dug a lot of holes in those days. We were early in our scientific quantification approach. And looking into those holes, this again is that hole 100 feet away. We had 18 inches of structured topsoil here, and the land performed accordingly. 18 inches. You can see the structure, you can see the roots, you can see the redox zone there which is alternately rusting and unrusting. 18 inches where we had 6 before. It was transformational. And how did we do that? And that'll be the content of this larger conversation and what we've moved to graduated to in order to achieve it, not just technically, but socially, economically, and otherwise. Of course, the basics are here that we have rock, water, air, life, incoming solar energy, and that's where the topsoil comes from. And it's both, in Wendell Berry's words, the source and destination of all life. The rate of growth, the depth and volume of plant roots are keys to soil formation, pedogenesis. And what are we aiming for? Are big, deep, dense root networks growing rapidly. What you see on the left is prairie root systems, up to tens of feet deep. Not like the short grass, short root, rotational grazing systems that became normative for a period. And all that work as a farmer and working with clients around the world led me finally in 2020 to come back home entirely and focus on doing stuff instead of broadly and shallowly, close and deep. We created the Land Care Cooperative. It's a group of 14 farms, and we work with many more farms outside the immediate orbit around Vermont. And the concept is that we are watershed contractors. We grow deep topsoil, healthy, functioning watersheds. We generate land care knowledge through a data cooperative, and data cooperativism is a key concept in all of this, rather than fragmented, isolated farmers. We pull, analyze, and create learning systems and products with our knowledge and data. We operate a learning system with landscape feedback, which I'll speak to, for healing land. We're building an agricultural, scientific, and digital platform for healing our watershed homes. So as watershed contractors, we grow deep topsoil watersheds, water security, high biodiversity, and environmental security as a service. I want to make a clean declaration here that in no way does this imply any sort of commodification of nature through what are called payment for ecosystem services, carbon offsets, nature-based solutions, RED across much of the global south, water credits, biodiversity credits, or anything. We consider that to be a destructive process of financialization of nature that will benefit the usual actors in that world. And I have a 25-year front row seat to this, including sitting in the corporate boardrooms of those working to figure out how to harness the work of the people who have learned how to heal land and turn it into credits that will ultimately only yield further financial concentration of wealth, and ultimately destruction of the ecosystems that sustain us. LandWeb is our scientific organization, and it's land, community, water, energy, biomass. We focus on scientific landscape feedback for land stewards and our communities to heal our watershed homes. What does this look like? In a nutshell, stewards' observations, judgments, and management records are combined with near-surface environmental measurements that include weather, 3D soil maps, all aspects of water, vegetation, and solar radiation. We combine that again with satellite remote sensing and integrate and continuously synthesize this in something that we don't call modeling. It's more akin to meteorology, where we have data assimilation. We don't say, oh, we had a wet spring and then a dry summer in 1975, but it was followed by a dry fall. So we'll probably have a dry fall. It's not like that in meteorology or in what we do, which is simulating and slightly forecasting landscape function. We call it measurement synthesis. So we're combining all of these measurements and farmer record keeping and management and observations and producing quantified landscape function and landscape feedback, energy, water, soil, biomass, carbon, nutrients, biodiversity. And the loop goes on because that feeds back to the farmers and the stewards. In all of this, we work with the field of environmental biophysics, which is fundamentally based in the relationships between organisms and their environments and the flows and cycles and transformations of energy and water within. The water cycle and the water balance and the energy balance are two critical non-negotiable components of that. With this physics-based framework, we have a scientific way of tracking the fundamentals and all the finer details, but always adhering to the inviolable physical principles of the conservation of energy and matter that we're tracking. We can track energy and water across large regions, from your farm to the watershed to the region to a continent. Within all of this, this is an image illustrating measurement synthesis and the ways that we integrate stream and groundwater measurements, soil measurement, vegetation, weather, radiation, and farmer record keeping to bring that together into the energy budget, the water budget, partial carbon budgets, and biomass tracking. With all of this, there's a lot of work on the ground. We have a remarkable team led by my colleague, Eliza Letourneau, who's out in the field daily doing the work on the ground of making all these measurements in the places that are representative of the landscape and that can scale from the farm to the region to the continent. Key piece of this is good soil mapping. And here we're doing electromagnetic induction mapping, which allows us to map large areas of soil quickly. And that serves as a foundation coupled with all of the other measurements we do for 3D soil maps, which anchor everything. You can see the way that we stratify landscapes before we go out and just start measuring willy-nilly. And ground truthing crews are a key piece of this. And I hope that I can talk with you all about a training program that we've begun with conservation districts, universities, and others to train teams on the ground to make the scalable measurements that can serve farmers and their whole communities. Farmer management and scientific learning software is fundamental in all of this. The farmer record keeping isn't an add-on or an additional or an afterthought. It's instrumental. Measurement synthesis does not work without it. It's a complete and integrated way of knowing the land and participating with not just what we do, what we graze, crop, spread, harvest, etc., but also how that's interacting with energy and minerals and water and the soil and all the other life forms. Oops. So that's all becoming much more advanced software, which will be a topic for another presentation. 3D soil mapping is so foundational to it all. And we're going about 4 foot deep with our cores, but it's not just a random core here and there. It's all in the right place to generate 3D soil maps that make the level of feedback necessary for the work of healing our watershed homes possible. No system works without feedback. Any system in nature, and yet we've, as land stewards, we'd have observational feedback, and sometimes we'll get big feedback like a flood or a drought or a crop failure, or the quality of the nutrients in our food. But underlying all that, we need to know the soil, that opaque, so difficult to know source and destination of it all. Here's Eliza, the colleague I mentioned, working on some of this 4 foot soil coring. And the ability to understand where water is going in the landscape flows from all of this. One key piece that we've been working on for years with our cooperative farms is a system that tracks biomass, plant growth, and total quantity of biomass in every paddock every day. And it isn't just a correlation between the satellite measurements and some ground truth. Rather, it's running every day, and it's tying the farmer record keeping, all of the environmental biophysical modeling, satellite remote sensing, ground truthing, and more. This is a really important part, especially in a learning system where we want to know if these 50 farms left 6 inches of residual and these 60 farms left 8 inches of residual, who grew more biomass over the course of the season, adjusting for all other factors, stuff like that. It's very complex how all of this goes together, but just showing you for this biomass tracking that we're out there making all these measurements and tying it to the satellite work. So that was a very brief scientific overview, and the cooperative I've described to you And now I want to talk about reviving a new, but really an old social framework, communities cooperating to heal our watershed homes. I don't think many of us doubt that we need to heal our soils, biodiversity, and watersheds. In this year of historic drought in New England, for example, uh, every year now for 3 years on July 10th, we've had catastrophic flooding. Everybody in Vermont remembers 2011 when we had a devastating storm called Irene that erased many of our communities, including this community, which is very special to me, which is Rochester, Hancock, and Granville, Vermont, sitting within a 100,000 acre approximately watershed at the headwaters of the entire White River in central Vermont. We've been working together to do this. So we, of course, live in a world of watersheds. This is a map of all the major watersheds on Earth. Everywhere you are in a place where water falls, infiltrates as much as possible, and drains ultimately to a common outlet. And just for example, in the United States, we have 2,256 Huck 8 watersheds, hydrological unit code 8 watersheds, with an average size of 500,000 acres. Then Huck 12 watersheds are smaller watersheds within those. And within Vermont, the political boundaries of Vermont, we have 18 Huck 8s and 265 Huck 12s, some amount of those being complete, 79 of them partial. This is a farmer I work closely with in Rochester, Nate Vessor, and this sums up the program. We want to live good lives here with our families and not get washed away. It's a beautiful place where I grew up, my hometown, Rochester, this watershed I'm describing. This is just a typical view of livestock on the land. It was devastated in the last few hundred years of colonization, of settlement. It was cleared and the rain runs off now. The soils we lost largely during the sheep craze in the early 1800s. And likewise, during the 1900s across Vermont, limnological studies show erosion rates about 35 times greater than pre-1700, 3,500 years worth of erosion every century. Alvina Harvey is an elder in the town and one of our core team members. And she says that since Tropical Storm Irene devastated our home, though existing road infrastructure has been hardened, we are faced with a frightening truth. We are still sitting at the mercy of the next big rainstorm. Here she is deep soil coring with Eliza on land that was recently rip zone, which I'll describe shortly. During that Irene storm in 2011, you're looking at the Long Island Sound downstream at the outlet of the Connecticut River. That soil and that water flowing into the Long Island Sound is shortly, about a week after the Irene storm. That's the soil and water from Vermont. We lost enormous amounts more, not to mention our infrastructure, which was devastated. This spring at town meeting, which is a historical tradition and one that we need more than ever, we had a unanimous vote of support for the following petition. Shall the voters of the town of Rochester support the White Rivers Headwaters pilot project to create and leave for our kids a prosperous, deep topsoil valley that is safe from flooding, led by participating farmers, loggers, and other community members, and supported by the Land Care Cooperative and LandWeb. Unanimous support, which was really heartening and represents a spirit of resilience and hope for the future for our kids. So in Alvina's words, our community has been organizing ourselves to heal our watershed. This is a new chapter that our community is working to write together. Here's kids working with me recently this spring, doing soil and other monitoring in the fields. It goes back, it harkens to the words of Hugh Hammond Bennett, the father of the Soil Conservation Service, the NRCS today, that flood control begins where the rains fall and runoff originates. And here we're looking at the two immediate upstream catchments. And I'll use catchments and watersheds interchangeably for international guests. Catchments is the worldwide common way to describe a watershed. Here in the US, we use watershed so commonly that we still use the language. But here are two catchments upstream from the village of Rochester on the right and just upstream on the left. Both of them about 2,500 to 3,000 acres, 1,000 hectares plus a piece. And much of that land is farmed by one farm across 42 landowners. And that's where we're focusing because it was the stream here that flows right into the heart of downtown Rochester that caused such unimaginable devastation in 2011. And we have the opportunity to soak in all that water up here in the immediately upstream catchment. And this is a practical, short-term, very ambitious, but also very doable endeavor. Here's a hillshade image of that showing you the relief of the landscape. And here are where people's homes are. And the idea, a lot of the soils in this upland above the village are what are called glacial tills. These glacial tills are unsorted material scraped by glaciers over tens of thousands of years and compacted by over a mile of ice for tens of thousands of years again. It is waterproof and root proof. And here's Brian Harvey, another farmer who works with that with North Hollow Farm, and I discussing they're enlarging their sugar house where they make maple syrup. Um, he dug a long trench for that expansion and we were investigating it. And you can clearly see massive mineral wealth in that subsoil, in that glacial till. And it looks topsoily in the top 2 feet. Only about 3 to 6 inches of that is actually A horizon topsoil. The rest has very light rooting. It's key. But what we were planning and what we've been doing is how to permeate and disintegrate that subsoil, that glacial till, with vegetable matter. I'm quoting a famous lay farmer from England mid last century. And we are doing that with a prairie strategy to stuff 6 foot columns with roots of very diverse, very deep rooted plants and structure that soil so that it can infiltrate, hold, store water, and access the minerals that are within that enormous mineral wealth we're looking at. So looking at the entirety of the White River watershed catchment, this is about 500,000 acres. And you can see at the bottom right, there's a single stream gauge currently operated by the USGS, which is a major community asset. In December of last year, we got a 2-inch rainstorm, and you can see that the stream level went from of the White River near the outlet went from below 4 feet to about 11 feet, very close to flood stage. That was a single 2-inch rainstorm. That's what's called a flashy watershed. A flashy watershed means that your landscape does not absorb much rainfall and runs off most of it. Likewise, the discharge in cubic feet per second, apologies to anybody who thinks logically in metric and the SI System International, that massive, I think a 12-fold increase in the volume of the river flowing out through that point. So that's one thing to have one stream gauge at the very bottom of the watershed. But if we want to be actionable, we're going to have stream gauges, and these are the two watersheds catchments I was showing you earlier. Here's stream gauge instrumentation to give us early warning and feedback in these early days as we increase the infiltration capacity and water holding capacity of those soils. So I'll jump now to tools to leave our kids a deep topsoil future. And pilot projects are certainly a key part of building that case. The one assumption that I need to be shared amongst everybody listening that I know in my heart and my experience and scientifically from working around the world with ranchers, farmers, and indigenous people and scientists to heal land is that we have learned how to rapidly convert subsoil into topsoil. And we've also learned how to rapidly increase biodiversity, the total diversity of life, including total biomass, which we need to do to fuel the solar powered engine called life that can structure the soil to give us the safety and security and food nutrient density fundamentally We've learned how to do this, and was largely underground. It's been interesting to watch it mainstream, plus the inevitable co-optation by various corporations and other parties. So again, it is about taking enormous mineral subsoil wealth that we walk upon every day and permeating it with the roots from very diverse, very deep-rooted plants and converting that into structured topsoil. We're grazers. We graze livestock to do it. And in the brittle environments of the earth, I think as Alan Savory and colleagues have shown for many decades now, we can reverse desertification in the places with seasonal rainfall, brittle environments. This is the Birdwell and Clark Ranch in Henrietta, Texas. I think it's about 5,000 cattle, moved many times a day. And we're not exactly grazing like that around here, but we do a smaller version of it, and we certainly are always open to scaling to have the herds capable of managing the prairie type vegetation communities that can transform our subsoils into topsoils. So I'm going to give you a quick overview here of some of our strategies uh, that all go together at once and in sequence and logically and with heart, as opposed to thinking in the primitive best management practice framework that has failed us so completely as a way of diffusing knowledge. We believe in bottom up, every farm is a research farm, farmers as data cooperatives, generating land care knowledge. These are the things that we have found success with when we do them all together. One is keyline sequence decompaction and deep ripping, and I'll speak to each of these in more detail. The other is massive plant and microbial diversity. The third is soil analysis and triggering mineral amendments. I would love it, especially financially, if we didn't need to bring minerals into play because it costs a lot to mine, transport, and apply those minerals to our land. But what we have found is that it's immensely useful in greatly accelerating the process. Ferments and other biostimulants, good grazing and harvest management, contour compliant traffic and infrastructure. We need to go with the lay of the land in order to help the water soak in, pretty much, and the continuous landscape feedback loop. Here's an example of a transformation, a worn down, largely agriculturally abandoned farm in New Hampshire that some clients hired me to help them with. And what they did here was the full mineral recommendations and a cover crop and perennial forb heavy planting. You can see in the foreground where it says transformations, this is what all of the land looked like. Blowing sand, and this is in New Hampshire, right? Blowing sand, um, a lot of low successional plants just barely holding on. And this was the following year. It was transformational. That was not physically decompacted with the subsoiler. It was a partial win, but it's been just an example of how quickly this can happen. Within one season is actually how quickly it happened. So I consider holistic management, the entire decision-making framework, the planning procedures, and the modalities like research, policy analysis, formation, etc., to be instrumental in winning and achieving all of this. This is an example of a holistic context pictured as a radar graph for this watershed that I've been talking about in the White River. And the kind of decision-making and rigorous methodical holism that goes into not just being reductionist and attacking problems and chasing this goal or that goal, regardless. When that's done regardless or without being mindful of the condition of the whole, the land, people, and economics whole, we tend to short circuit, sabotage ourselves, etc. Certainly, prairie massive plant diversity is foundational. Can't overstate this, both practically, experientially, scientifically. The Jena experiments in Germany are a fascinating example showing that with increasing diversity, there's an almost linear increase in biomass, yield, insect diversity, nutrient retention, water infiltration, etc. The more diversity, the better. and it's at least 4 functional plant groups. But the forbs, of course, everything you see that's heavily taprooted, these are forbs, broad-leafed, herbaceous, perennial plants specifically are what we focus on. This is an example of a perennial prairie analog established here in Vermont, and you can see the blooms, and those blooms are key to so much, including sustaining the pollinator populations that have crashed in the last century. It's estimated in the last century by serious world-renowned entomologists that we've lost 95% of insect biomass in the last century, terrestrial insect biomass. In the last 30 years, everywhere this research has been done on insect biomass and diversity, we've lost on the order of 70%. So it's rapidly accelerating. Our bloom chain program is about reversing insect extinction by planting billions of flowers. Here's an example of goats grazing one of these chicory and cup plant and many other four dominant prairie plantings. And you can see it's spectacular. These are 8-foot tall pastures as opposed to the old knowledge about graze 3 to 8 inch grass down to 1 to 2 inches repeat. Completely different environment for insects, for the animals, and for the dynamics of water in our farms and watersheds. The plants we use very commonly, as many native as possible and some introduced: chicory, plantain, burnet, caraway, all kinds of asteraceae, the sunflower family, yarrow, bergamot, echinacea, etc. All of the legumes are also forbs: white and red clover, bird's foot trefoil, alfalfa, sandfoin, Sicer milk vetch. And this is an example. This was really one of the first, for me, game-changing chicory-based prairie type plantings that we established in 2013. This is in spring of 2014 after catastrophic flooding and about a foot of sediment deposition, that we had 8 and 9 foot tall chicory prairies there. This is far over livestock's heads, and produced as much biomass by the end of June as most farms produce over a whole season. But this is characteristic of what happens when we do everything together. Here are cattle at Larson Farm, Jerseys, grazing one of these types of plantings. Just more examples of the fecundity and the nutrient content through forage analysis is through the roof. Forbs have, in my experience, 50 to 100% more mineral content, and that translates through into the animals, grazing them, and us eating the animals or the animal products like milk and meat, eggs. This is an interesting planting where half the field was planted to one of these chicory-based pastures and the other half was unplanted. There's no fence, and these 350 dairy cows are showing their clear preference for the chicory. This has to do with the cover crop sequencing that when we go from these grass legume systems to these diverse pasture, the much more diverse deep-rooted systems. This is on the Larson Farm in Wells, Vermont. And good grazing is foundational to it all, and it's such a big concept, but the superpower of grazers is that we manage herds that can impact tens and hundreds and thousands of acres through our good decision making and observation and feedback, like the scientific feedback I was showing you earlier. But certainly it's a leave more strategy. In other words, we're not harvesting everything off to the nub. We're leaving at least, and usually a lot more, half of what we grow to the soil community, to the insects, for habitat, for floral resources, to increase infiltration, because biomass litter on the surface makes such a difference. Here are those frisky Jerseys, and they just love the forages and everything. They prefer the forage-based foraging. P.A. Yeomans and Sons developed over, let's see now, it's been over 75 years, the keyline plan overall, which is both a landscape design strategy, a very sophisticated, beautiful, and elegant because it follows the land's lead, and also a process for converting subsoil into topsoil with everything that I described earlier: minerals, physical decompaction with a subsoiler, high diversity plantings, and good grazing management. And I'll quote this last part here. Deepening the living topsoil 12 to 18 inches is a practical short-term goal during a 3-year conversion process. This entire school has widespread success in the farming and ranching community around the world, but is widely panned by academics who have been slow to wrap their minds around the fact that life can convert subsoil into topsoil. But that is the way nature works. Using prairie dynamics is definitely a booster, an accelerator on it all. So the overall process is learn and plan good grazing, address your nutrient deficiencies, and prime seed with biostimulants. And I'll show you some neat ways that we do that in a moment. And start the process of decompacted, hard, compacted soil. And keep that up every year, going a little deeper, 3-4 inches, especially when we're planting into the rips as we do. And before you know it, you have deep roots and deep soil structure that now infiltrates and holds water and grows a lot more plants and accesses the minerals to make the mineral dense forages to feed the livestock, to feed us. So this Vermont rip sower is one product of our cooperative, and it is a combination subsoiler, seeder, and liquid injector through which we inject liquid biostimulants. And I'll read you an example. After one ripso, Matt and Guy Schwanier are dairy farmers in northern Vermont. The soil is now aggregated to 8 inches where it used to be 3 inches, and we're seeing much less runoff from our fields than we used to. Additionally, the fields we ripsowed went from being some of our lowest yielding fields to being consistently our highest yielding fields. Just more examples of the ripsower because the pictures are worth quite a few thousands of words. As you can see, you can barely detect after you've ripsowed other than the soil has gone from compacted, tight, in many cases semi-waterproof, to physically loosened. And this machine, this was the first one we ever built. We're on generation 10 now, is seeding and injecting all these biostimulants right into the rips. Yes, this Gen 10 one now is an air seeder, which is really exciting. And on the picture on the left, a farmer sent me just the other day, this is in the midst of the worst drought in Vermont history of rip-sown ground. You can see how clean it is after rip-sowing. And if you squint your eyes a little bit, you can see the pattern of rips in the background. And there's a group of us standing down in the field, foraged to our knees, again in this drought. And it's so hard to see everything when you're down in it, but by going and standing on the hill, you get that overview. This is an example of a chicory heavy planting shortly after emergence. Growth on that was incredible. Here's a cornfield that a dairy farmer named Scott Cleveland planted. He went from a cornfield to this incredible high diversity planting of forbs, and he's now seeded eastern gamagrass and cup plant into that. And that's just an ongoing experiment led by practical dairy farmers. More examples, including 8-foot tall cup plants, examples of ripsown fields with the forbs growing in the old pastures. On the left, you see how well these plantings do in drought. That was a pretty severe drought a couple of years back. And a key piece here, and this is research just on subsoiling, shows that runoff is reduced by half with one contour ripping treatment. That's an instantaneous reduction in runoff. So if your community is threatened by drought and flood, here is one way that you could instantly double the amount of water going into your soil, which is, the math doesn't work out exactly that way, but to cut off runoff in half. That's very powerful. It's all boosted when we do the planting, but the contour compliance is critical. This was a really interesting example on that farm. They went from 2 to 3 inches of soil to 10 plus inches of functional aggregated root filled topsoil in 14 months. And you can see the pattern. I believe you can, if you can see my screen well enough, that the pattern of the rips relative to the contours, it's off contour, but it's drifting water towards the ridge centers and away from the streams, which is conserving every drop. We don't want to shed water. We want to soak it all in, and we move it toward the ridges so that it has every chance to go down as much as can be held against gravity, water holding capacity, and then any excess recharging our groundwater. Again, to the patterns of it. More patterns. And we'll get to nutrient transformation now. This, of course, is a protein highly magnified, which these molecular machines are so profound in what they do. We're made of them and they make everything happen. All of the enzymes are proteins that are multiplying chemical reactions a millionfold. So one thing I want to touch on that's very exciting to me, but it's a point that we have to earn our way to the massive mineral wealth underfoot in our subsoils. So let's talk about understanding accessing in situ soil minerals. This is a 4-foot soil core characteristic. This happens to be in my living room. We do this numerous places wherever we're so moved or required to do the job at the moment. So looking at on the right, you have the clay soils characteristic of the Champlain Valley. And on the left, you have these glacial tills. These are two of the major soil types in Vermont. And here you have Eliza taking these 4-foot cores and holding one of these cores, expressing some amazement. Um, and we're back to the 4-foot core. So let's look at the difference between a malic-3 extraction and a total nutrient digestion. People may have heard of total nutrient digestion. It's a very valuable assessment of the total content of minerals in your soil versus what's adsorbed onto the soil colloid, which is extracted through a strong acid like a malic-3. Total nutrient digestion would be too much detail to go into the process, but that's looking at all the minerals. So this is just in the A horizon on that 4-foot core, the 0 to 11.5 inches. And in terms of phosphorus, parts per million, we have 53 parts per million available through malic-3, 650 parts per million that represent the total. Potassium, 32 to 880 parts per million. Sulfur, 23 to 180. Zinc, 1 to 48. Manganese, 45 to 582. Now, converting that to pounds to acre might give US folks a little bit better window into how many pounds are in that top roughly foot of soil. So 173 pounds of phosphorus versus 2,119. And the list goes on. In other words, there is massive mineral wealth. A lot of it is actually in rock. Some of it's adsorbed onto the soil colloid. Some of it's in solution, a small amount. And some of it's structural. We're not going to access that or we'd lose our organic matter or even the rocks, the feldspar, et cetera, that comprise our soils. So I can go through like that. This is again on the top foot or so, looking at, and notably calcium in that top foot, a lot of it is extracted by the malic-3. We don't, here in Vermont anyway, we don't have inexhaustible supplies necessarily, depending where you are. There are regions that are very high in calcium, but many that aren't. Pounds per acre of calcium, magnesium, iron, aluminum. And the micronutrients, copper, boron, and moly, you can see again, there's a lot more in there than is available through the strong acid extraction. The molybdenum, however, which is so critical, the key enzyme for atmospheric nitrogen fixation is nitrogenase, but the full name of it is molybdenum nitrogenase. Cobalt also plays a critical role in this. Without moly, we don't have free atmospheric nitrogen fixation. And so we're at vanishingly small levels here, even in the total soil. So that's an important point and one that would suggest for amending our soils. There have been results achieved in New Zealand, for example, and molybdenum is applied across New Zealand and Australia, just along with phosphate fertilizer. It's part of the mix. Um, I'm thinking back to examples of Kiwi research showing 38 to 379% increases in biomass yield simply with the addition of much less than a pound of moly per acre. Now, I just want to show you that was just looking at the top foot, right? But now let's look briefly at the entire 4-foot soil column, which is not the entirety of the potential rooting depth. It's just the practical measurement limit. The potassium right here, these two numbers, in the top foot or so, we had 104 pounds of available potassium, elemental potassium, whereas we had 2,868 pounds of elemental potassium in the soil altogether. In the next 18 inches down, there's another 383 pounds that we can pull out with a Mehlich 3, but over 10,000 pounds. And in the bottom 2 feet or so, let's say, no, it was about a foot plus 18 inches, 2 foot. So in the bottom foot and a half, we have an enormous quantity of potassium in the soil. Very small amount that could be extracted if roots were going down there. The same goes on through for calcium, magnesium, and I could keep going through manganese and sodium and phosphorus and sulfur and boron and copper and zinc. Enormous quantities of minerals. How do we access them? Moly, you can see remains quite low. The totality of the element molybdenum in 4 feet of soil, this is on a per acre basis, in pounds per acre, is 2 pounds, 2.35, 4.35, 4.78, 4.7 pounds. There's not a lot of it. And it's one of those things that's a good idea to think about. Well, if it's so important to nitrogen fixation, maybe we should be amending. Another key mineral that we're working with is calcium silicate, and our cooperative is now selling this at a tenth of the rate that was available currently, even a year ago. Without delivery, this stuff was about $1,000 a ton, and we've got it with delivery within reason from Vermont down to about under $100. It's it's the drought mineral. It enlarges the root systems. It activates gene expression for drought resistance. It increases uptake of all other minerals. And the silicon, of course, is, even though it's not counted as an essential plant mineral, it is so important to overall plant function, including disease resistance, partly because fungi simply have a hard time penetrating leaves when they have that tiny bit of silicon in them. We've been working a lot with brewing lactobiosecurity. So we're brewing lactic acid bacteria and we're spraying it on manure, on barns. We're making no-turn composts. It turns out it makes a chemical called DHPPA, dihydroxyphenyl propionic acid, that actually melts the cement in fragipan. And if it has the precursor of chlorogenic acid, which only comes from a small number of plants, especially those in the Asteraceae family, like chicory. Now, also, there are a few plants that exude this DHPPA, including Italian ryegrass, annual ryegrass, Festuloleum, anything related to annual ryegrass. And we plant Italian ryegrass routinely in our pastures because animals do so well on it and because its root systems are so amazing. But there's a bigger picture here. And we brew it out of milk. We make some sourdough starter on the counter, we put them together, we make whey. That whey is stabilized with molasses and water. And then we scale it up as necessary with other ingredients. So what are the benefits of this stuff? Largely speaking, this lactic acid bacteria comprise a lot of individual bacteria. It's It's the same bug that's in most of our fermented foods through history. It's very useful, and billions of years of coevolution between these bugs and higher organisms and pathogens like viruses have really created an incredible opportunity for us. The most important one that I want to share is that lactic acid bacteria have been shown to be highly protective against avian influenza and all forms of influenza. All influenza ultimately is bird flu. But to give you just a couple examples here, in the literature, we've done a literature review and found 28 peer-reviewed papers so far showing incredible results. I'll just share one in the interest of time. And that is that mice spritz with Lactobacillus casei up the nose very lightly, uh, and challenged with avian and other forms of influenza, 100% survived when they got the spritz. 100% of them died when they didn't. When they got two spritzes, when they upped the dosage a little bit, they lost no weight. Otherwise, when they got just one spritz, they lost maybe 10% of body weight. This is very powerful. It's reflected across all the literature. I'll share that our farms have been trialing this, and we have found astounding results in addition to the benefits of a far higher microbially diverse compost. It's a no-turn compost. But last winter, farms that sprayed for 5 months, we saw a 93% reduction in calf respiratory illness. Massive win for that farm. And in chickens, on thousands of chickens on this farm, where they were spraying the environment, the feed, and the animals daily at very dilute rates, 1 to 100 to 200 with water. Um, what they had was a, a major increase in the laying rate. So they basically had they scientifically had a 25% increase in the laying rate in the winter housing, and they had a 75 to 80% reduction in mortality across the laying chickens and the broiler chickens. Astounding difference in economics and overall health of the food and the animals. I'll gladly share this with anyone. We have 28 peer-reviewed papers. We're working now with scientists at a medical school we're going to begin doing all the microbiology and um, pathology and epidemiology to begin to investigate this at scale. I want to offer that if anyone faces the threat of epidemics in their community, here is a very powerful strategy to be able to address this. And I would say that we're working this winter on misting it into barn environments. I personally take small amounts of lactic acid bacteria from various forms of whey, sauerkraut, etc., and put a tiny quantity, like in my humidifier, in my home to protect myself. And I think that this is a real strategy, especially in light of the recent uh, disassembly of pandemic preparedness that's occurring at the level of national government. So another one that's very powerful is called red water, and that's simply circulating nutrient rich but dilute water, like manure runoff water, uh, in large ponds, grows these photosynthetic purple sulfur bacteria that have profound benefits for soil health, yield, and decreases in pathogenic bacteria and other microorganisms. Johnson Sioux static aerated high fungal compost is certainly something we want to work more with. I finally got a chance to start working with it this summer. But in the picture on the right, you see an example of 2 pounds of high fungus compost per acre trials yielding pretty amazing changes. Vermicomposting, biostimulants. Some of our no-brainers are fish hydrolysate from the sponsor of this, we routinely use Neptune's Harvest. Sea crop is another miracle mineral. Our cooperative sells that. Agrodynamics in Pennsylvania sells that. Very, very powerful biostimulant. And by biostimulant, we mean the results are way beyond what you would expect from the mineral content of that. Here's willow tea, full of plant growth hormones. There's wood ash water, full of soluble potassium and other benefits. We routinely use forest duff and make a tea out of it. These are all just examples, and we almost always use lactic acid bacterium when we're seeding and spraying fields. These are examples of a new planting of that chicory sward, the incredible fecundity of these chicory swards as they begin to mature. And this is the first spring after planting. I want to talk briefly about the absolute need for water secure infrastructure for farms and watersheds. It's going to be contour compliant. Land-based people through history have learned that you have to match the contours of the land in order to achieve water security. And of course, keyline is by far the most advanced developed form of landscape design, whether for a farm, watershed, or cities. And this is an example of one of the archetypal keyline properties called Yobarni in Australia. This is lifted, this illustration here is lifted directly from my good friend and colleague Darren Doherty and design work they did. This is actually the Yobarni property, but starting with look at an area of land and then look at the contours of that land. Divide that land on paper, digitally in your mind, into the major little valley shapes, primary valleys, we'll call them in this case. And then find your key points, which is where heading up a valley, the land suddenly gets steeper. Those are often the best and most economical high water storage site, good pond sites. Design your irrigation channels and your diversion channels. Implement your irrigated areas. Your roads follow water, and then your forestry follows roads. And you end up with a beautiful landscape, which again is Yobarni. So we have designs and have built some of these and really need to be, this is the infrastructure for what's coming. We need to abandon the straight up and down, ignoring contours, ignoring Mother Nature's lessons for us, and instead following her lead for irrigated, low runoff, high biodiversity, deep topsoil farms and watersheds. These are just examples of designs I've done in recent years. A landscape that I built along these lines, building it, installing the pipe through the dam. So that was a big handful. I still have 3 minutes to go. I can't believe I'm ahead of schedule. I want to leave you with a question or two, though. How can we support the lands, the plural land stewards and community to do the work that we all need? We need to heal the land. We need to leave our kids deep topsoil watersheds. We can leave our kids a deep topsoil future, and we can do it quickly. It takes capital and knowledge and landscape feedback. I'll offer a couple resources. One is start with pilot projects. It's these early wins. And yes, it's all very expensive. I just spent $650 per acre on a small pilot project on minerals, just on minerals alone, because our land, our soils are exhausted in many cases, eroded, leached by acid rain, leached by high rainfall since the last glaciation. We are training conservation districts, university personnel, et cetera, to have these local ground truthing crews. And I want to encourage anybody to reach out to us. We're geographically limited, but we can train you. It's a service that our nonprofit scientific organization offers, and your measurements and research will be scalable in service to your farmers across the region, across continents. We have an upcoming series of workshops with Russ Wilson, a brilliant Pennsylvania prairie grazer, that I'd encourage anybody to sign up for. You can capture those QR codes, or I'll share this presentation if people want it. But he's really nuts and bolts practical lessons on how to get this work done. And that's education from the farm community, for the farm community, and for our larger community. This is knowledge generation. It's time to reclaim the necessary knowledge generation instead of being told what practices, what method, etc., are relevant by uppity ups, by experts who are telling us what to do. We're growing this from the bottom. Thank you. I'll take questions and discussion, although I could use a 30-second break if that would be possible.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Thank you, Abe. Wonderful. Take a quick break. I'm going to encourage people while you do that. You can go ahead and turn off. And it's an encouragement, and I don't want to give a threat, but if you guys don't pose your questions in the Q&A or ask those things, then you will be left with just what I want to know. And I'm excited for that, but you have all taken the time out of your day, out of your busy schedules, and prioritized being here. So seriously, please do ask questions. I think I mentioned in the chat, if you have a question or need clarification, somebody else does, either who's here today or will be watching this on the recording. I know for me, I have pages, but it's like going back here to the very beginning. So I am going to, let's see, I have those and we'll start working through them. But again, please use this opportunity. I think that there's this Abe is a tremendous resource. I know his presentation focused a lot on Vermont as where he lives, but he has also spent time out west in a completely different landscape. And I think part of the value of this presentation is understanding farming at place, understanding your area and your location. So I am going, oh, great, we're getting some questions. Keep them coming. I'll ask a few, and then certainly if I'm not going to hold us to the 30 minutes of me chatting. So send them over there. I think I'm even getting some text. Hey, Abe, you're back. I can't ask.
Great. I see one question from Gwendolyn Atwood that I can answer easily, and that's what it air seeder.
Oh,
So
yeah, great.
the first ripsower where gravity drop, the seed drops, it's expelled. He uses a sponge foam roller to grab the seed and push it down a tube, and it falls down to get planted. But an air seeder is the modern version. The thing is, air seeders cost $5, $10, $25,000, and we've invented and built this ripsower with an incredible assistance, is an understatement, of a Mennonite fabricator named Jonas Shirk. And Jonas has just been such a creative partner as we've iterated through our 10th version now of these. And an air seeder, we now have hooked up, basically created an air seeder for about $300 that blows the seed through the tubes so that we're not relying on gravity, which it can get tricky when tubes get cold, when there's a hundred ways to fail in the field. And one of those is the air seeder solves that problem. So it just automatically blows the seed to exactly where it needs to be.
That's great. Awesome. Well, while you were away, I said I have pages of notes and things that I started writing. One thing that I was listening to your presentation was, of course, oh my goodness, how did you do that in 1 hour? Left with incredible amounts of question for almost each slide that you had, but felt this a resonance almost, or a understanding of how I keep landing on nutrient density, like the quality of our food. If I look at a problem in society, or if I look at a health thing, I always land back there. And I felt you kept doing that with watershed restoration. And so I'm a little curious if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit how you've landed there as the prioritization, because I know your history was as a farmer yourself in different scales and in different regions. So that's one thing I noticed was you kept coming back to that.
Yeah, the nutrient density to ground ourselves there, it's an absolute priority. Um, it's interesting, and how we achieve it though. I kind of kept peeling the onion. Like, how do you get to high mineral and phytochemical density in plants? And well, It's going to come, in the plants that we eat or the animals that eat the plants that we eat and so on. Um, I'm I'm a I only eat meat for ethical reasons because of my love for plants. But that said, I'm just kidding. I love plants and I eat plenty of them. But you peel the onion, well, that high nutrient density milk that I'm drinking came from a cow who was in a healthful, low stress environment with good water and very high nutrient density food, which are plants. And that came from the soil and the environment within which it was grown. And of course, water is the limiting factor to plant growth in most places in the world. Um, uh, and that goes through to, well, where are those coming from? Well, the soil, unless they're actually not there. And that was why it was important for me to show the total nutrient digestion, to show that there are tremendous amount of minerals there, but we have to earn them, and that we earn them through enzymes and acids generated by plants and microbes. And in order for those plants and microbes to generate those acids and enzymes, the total soil environment needs to be humming, which is fueled by the solar energy gathered by the plants. So there's no prioritization. It's all just embedded in one big ball of wax. Um,
Well, I loved that concept of earning it, because we
yeah,
talk so much just about the topsoil. And sometimes, as we exploit things, we feel like we're exploiting it all. But when you said that and you showed that, I thought, no, 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 no. There's just this very shallow part that we're able to like pull from. But if we earn, that trust and that relationship, then we have access to really everything we need. And, I always go like spiritual and everything else. Like, isn't that a metaphor for everything? Like, we can
it is.
all live in this shallow topsoil, but you have to earn the right to the resources that are below that. So I loved that. I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you. And I didn't answer your water question very
Oh,
well, though. Um, but I started with the nutrient density because yes, that is the most immediately apparent thing. Um, but water, of course, I can go weeks or months, I'm told. I've gone 6 days without food and I made it fine. Actually lost a little bit of extra that I didn't want anyway. I can go days without water and I can go seconds without air. And the bugs are like us, the microbes in the soil. And it's the same way. And addressing that compaction, which is ultimately biological, but us fracturing it with the subsoil or shattering that compaction, that is it's it's a jump start, if you will, or a defibrillator
okay.
to undo that damage of that packed soil without air that can't hold water, etc. But what we're finding the world over is that there's either too much water, flooding, and say this at the moment. At the moment, there's either too much, there's not enough, drought, or it's dirty, it's polluted. And the rainfall has glyphosate and nanoplastics and everything in it these days. So I'm in the world as it is, and we're doing our best. But the water thing is so critical, and every irrigated civilization has collapsed today. The one that we're living in now sure has used a lot of fossil fuels to pump our way out of that, dam and pump our way out of that. But ultimately, the biggest reservoir by far of available fresh water is the soil. And it's soil moisture that's fundamental. We need to infiltrate it. We need to be able to hold it in structured, high organic matter soil. And it's simple math that I want us to wrap our head around, that in a foot of soil, if you're lucky and have a foot of soil, you might be able to store 2 inches of water there that's available for plant growth. 2 inches will get you through a few weeks of growth with a strong growing crop. Multiply that by 6. Okay, now you got a foot of water. That's part of the punchline, is to get through the droughts that are here and that are coming. It's easily forecastable that they're coming harder and worse. That we need to, basic self-interest dictates that we increase the depth of structured topsoil that can store water from on an order of 10 times what we have now. And that's what prairie does. We have the natural template. Prairie does that automatically. So we need flood proof, drought proof, high nutrient availability. These are all conditions for growing the plants that can give us the food and water security we need.
I'm going to ask this one, and then I'll jump over to the Q&A because people are posting there. I'm so excited. So your presentation was heavy on Vermont because that's where you live and that's where you're doing your research, but you've spent time out west. And so I'm curious about, for the people who are listening in from all over the world, what are some first steps, or what's your approach when you go to a landscape? So like if I listen to this and now I want to go walk around on my landscape, how would you recommend people start to begin to think broader, think about their watersheds? Like how could you apply that in another region?
It's hard for me to answer. It's been an enormous lift. I said that I had to stop being global and shallow and go local and deep. And building what we've been building for 5 years, the headwinds, the lack of funding, the incredible intelligence of the farmers, the receptiveness of common sense working class people everywhere we go, because we're faced with a financialized conservation alternative, which is called 30 by 30 and 50 by 50, which is based in fortress conservation in the former colonies.
I'm not familiar with that. What is?
Fortress conservation has kicked the people off the land to save the land. 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 is all for that is elite conservation-based concept of, in order to heal Earth, we remove people.
Oh, take the people off.
But
Okay.
we're part of the land.
Oh,
We are
absolutely.
we're plain citizens of the land community.
Yeah.
So back to your question, how to put this somewhere else? Start farmer who had the farming child, because certainly the researchers don't. That's a challenge. Don't go to the researchers and ask for permission or ask for them to state how to. And all ourselves on that. I'm an example educator, but by default, I have to be. And we're sharing the lessons we've learned. Bringing Russ Wilson, that Pennsylvania grazer, to Vermont is bringing someone decade has been grazing prairie in the Northeast, which seems people, but access to capital, that's a game changer because we've rubbed sticks to make all this happen. And it slowed us to probably 1/50th of the rate that we could be moving because all the science that we do is real and rigorous and expensive.
Now you're
And all
talking
the
BFA language. Yeah, like we're rubbing sticks over here trying. Yeah,
rubbing sticks
yeah, we
together.
understand. Yeah.
And all the farming, I mean, to undo 300 years of soil loss, the proposition that, oh, if you just grow healthier food and market it as regenerative or organic or something, that'll pay. No, that won't pay for it. So we need to think big about money. I'm not going to go into it other than to say that money is a human technology. And to say that there isn't enough money to heal the earth that sustains us is like saying there aren't enough inches to measure the board that you have and I need. It's preposterous. And in fact, it's a super oppressive framework to think that money is only private capital, etc. But back to starting where you are, it's get a coalition of the willing and bring in people that can help you with the base level understanding and start growing it from there. In a sense, it's much like growing a plant, right? You start with a little bit of soil, a little bit of water, seed, take
Yeah.
care of it, and it's going to grow and it's going to surprise you. And your root is not going to be like our root. But a coalition of the willing and knowledge brought in to help you save yourself 50 years or however long it would take you to come to this yourself. We came to this through farming. We came to this as farmers asking the question, how can we grow food and grow topsoil? And it's been a long and winding road, and all the science and technology and the ripsower we invented, those all just came as necessary next steps. So it wasn't a clear line.
Sure.
It was
Right.
just
Good.
general projection, take the next right step.
Okay, I'm going to jump over here to questions from our attendees. Okay, could you please share the presentations, which you said would be fine, so I'll get those from you later and share that in our email, if that's okay.
Glad to, and it has links and references and everything in it so that people can click through, and even on the PDF, you'll be able to click a lot of the things.
Oh, great. Okay. And then here, how do you help farmers with irrigation and fertilizer to shift their approach? In our experience, it is more psychology than practice.
Uh, hmm. It's a little challenging because it could be interpreted to mean that farmers who are currently irrigating and fertilizing, how would I help swing them? But we're also doing our best to irrigate and fertilize, speaking broadly. We want irrigation systems because that's part of resilience and that's necessary in the world as it is now ecologically, um, even in high rainfall Vermont. But what I find that's so interesting as a I was a part of the couple decades long process, largely in the Midwestern US, where large scale commodity growers, in effect, crafted the current phase of regenerative agriculture. And these are people who, the 10 cow micro dairy or something who says only small farmers have it right. In fact, I found many of these large farms were brilliant students of the land who wanted to be part of the land, part of the solution of healing land for their own operation, for their community. One of the sets of pictures I showed you is one of my best friends. He's a conventional confinement dairy farm who started grazing a few years back and then started converting cornfields, the bane of civilization, right? Bare tillage corn production. He converted that to this incredible, one of the most incredible Ford prairie analogs I've ever seen. And he's leading more than anybody else with the Eastern gamma grass and cup plants. So I find there's tremendous instinct to innovate. And in fact, a lot of large so-called conventional growers actually have the means to do experiments and want to do experiments. So I think be flexible with that. It would be my approach.
And I
That
think that was, I had written on my page, like fear, and I have it circled a bunch. Like sometime, at least when I talk with farmers who are to a point to make a radical change, it's often based in fear. Like they're out there, it's like we're about to lose the farm. We're willing to try anything because now we're either going to lose the farm or we're going to lose the farm. Like, and so I was wondering if that was a little more like if things are going along kind of okay, where's the incentive? I'm going to bring this into like two things. How do we have you seen people motivated not by fear? And then also, I mean, early on, you had talked about some of the programs that are supposedly incentivizing for carbon credits or different things aren't working. How do we incentivize? Or, what has been your experience with that? How are people coming to you? At what point in their journey are they arriving?
everybody that I work with is motivated by absolute love for community and the land. Like that's just fundamental. So that's and don't go to people frothing at the mouth with anger and fear or whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So yeah, start with what's your zone of influence, zone of it. Like go to the people who care and who are, that's where you start. A, B. So it's always love based for their kids. And I mean, this is a different story that we can rapidly create and leave deep topsoil watersheds to our kids. Like that's love for your babies. And we all love our kids. So there's a starting point. Um, the other thing that absolutely works and has been helping us to overcome in effect, a gatekeeper mentality. There is an expert class who don't want to see farmers be the ones who innovate. They don't believe us. Where's your science? You know, where's your particle accelerator? We don't have a particle accelerator. It's your job to bring the particle accelerator. That's your social obligation as scientists, but you haven't brought it. Instead, we have this reductionist scientific research that's like, we're going to create a best management practice based on one thing. So the other thing that's absolutely always worked, and capital is always limiting for us, is pilot projects. In other words, put $20,000 and a well-reasoned plan together with scientific landscape feedback in the hands of every farmer you can, because that's how evolution happens. It's distributed, lots and lots of experiments, and don't condemn a practice based on whether or not the farmer that year in their learning curve, in the weather, with the soil, etc., as it is. Instead, it's our learning system. But funded pilot projects with funded science and funded farmers with the equipment, the seed, the fertilizer, and I say fertilizer, mostly I mean minerals. We don't need nitrogen fertilizer, but I'm also, if there's a case where some ammonium sulfate is going to help a situation drastically, like buy you 5 years, I'll use ammonium sulfate. I'm not, you know, I'm a little bit flexible there, to be frank.
Yeah, I
You,
think we talked about that just briefly yesterday where, I'm at a spot where I'm like, give me every tool. I want everything in
yeah,
my toolbox and then let me learn my land, but don't give me the 5 things I can and can't do to get a certification. I like
that
sometimes, yeah.
I'm we're aligned on that. Pilot projects are fundamental though, and what they do is they remove some risk, or rather, they share some of the risk amongst everybody in a community. So we're thinking now at the level of community, not of how can Joe, who can't pay the electric and the grain bill, how can Joe
Mm.
afford to do this experiment? Like we as a community, Joe is the only one who knows how to hook up a PTO, a PTO on a tractor and move the cows and milk the cows, etc. So we're going to get behind Joe. So
Oh,
I'd
that's
say
wonderful.
it's a remove it from the single farm, think community, and recognize that the only people who can get this work done, and this is one of my greatest fears, and it makes me very sad, is the loss of the embodied knowledge of how to manage land that is happening with every farm we lose. Every farm we lose is it's like the burning of the Alexandrian libraries. And because there's so much knowledge of the land itself, the land at that farm and that farmer's ability. I've learned more from farmers than I've learned from anybody else in the world.
That's beautiful. And I'm wondering if this is a little bit, Priscilla's asking a question, key line for every farm, please elaborate.
Yeah, well, Keyline is both a landscape design methodology that can be learned. And what that means is contour compliant infrastructure with storage for any excess runoff. And everything, you saw some keyline landscapes. You can see rows of trees, rows of fields, ponds, everything's linked, everything's contoured. And it's not on contour, it's all off contour, but very specifically so to advantage. Then keyline is also a strategy developed by PA yeomans beginning in the 40s to rapidly deepen subsoil, in rapidly deepen topsoil into subsoil, convert subsoil into topsoil. And we've developed so many refinements on what he brought, and my criticisms of him are zero for having the courage at that time, courage and intelligence, wicked, wicked intelligence. And he mobilized a lot of capital. He was a retired gold mine engineer and builder, and he basically was a gentleman farmer. And it's a good example of effectively a class trader. He was very well to do, and he chose to put those resources into healing the land that he loved.
Um,
So, keyline for every farm and every watershed, it is the basis for intelligent design. I've seen no system better in my life. And it's funny because people, it seemed for some reason around here anyway, people basically heard the term and all of a sudden they have a dinner party opinion about it. And it's like, no, there are dozens of books and research and studies. Read the primary works or get education. And the primary educator on earth today is certainly Darren Doherty with the Regenerations platform. Darren's a good friend, and they have a brilliant training program for training people of how to do keyline landscape design.
Oh, incredible. Um, Billy is writing, and I joined a little late, but can you provide more details? For example, the shank tooth depth of seed on the ripso machine for 4 base pastures. Is that something that's custom built, or is it a set? I'm throwing in that last part. It just says, is that custom built?
I bet we've built 50 of these over the years. And what our cooperative did is take all the lessons that we'd learned from dozens and dozens of farmers and every model that we built and work with the the implement manufacturer, Jonah Shirk, and our cooperative, Land Care Cooperative, invented this machine, which is just stacking functions all together, right? I mean, we put a seeder and a liquid injector on a subsoiler and just kept going through the iterations. And the farms are the R&D department. The farms using it, tons of risk. You know, the first one we built compared to the 10th one we built, that looks very similar to the outside eye, but it's there. it's a very much a refined implement. So our land care cooperative organization sells rip sowers. And for anybody who wants to invent them, I encourage you to, because like I said about microbial evolution, we want to distribute. However, we have a darn good machine. And we have a darn good machine. And it took us 20 years and many, many dozens of versions of these where we just kept working out the various problems. The depth is entirely dependent on your local conditions. And that includes, first and foremost, you have a penetrometer and you're using it at the right time to measure the compaction in your soils and finding your pan. Most of us have a pan, whether it's a plow pan, a glacial pan like we have here in the mountains of Vermont. We find the pan and we go a few inches below it and just start loosening the subsoil each time, but it doesn't turn it as you saw.
Mhm.
And the seeding depth is just like you would see, just like any seeding depth, you know, it's very close to the surface, right?
Right.
And it depends on the size of this.
Okay, so now I was just picturing as this goes. So the next year, do you just shift over like a few inches? Because I imagine you're not following the same lines each year. Like eventually, is that kind of a system? You adjust the depth and you adjust. Now you're over, a foot or however.
Yeah, to what you're saying. And in a way, rip sowing per se is a poor boy strategy where we're taking, if I could afford to do full tillage, full fertilization, 2 to 3 cover crops, and full prairie planting on every acre, I would. I would. But we're poor boying our way into this, and we've got a lot of pasture and hayland that we can immediately start improving for a
Mhm.
fraction of the cost of that full process I described, which we do and have done plenty. And it works far better to go full bore.
Mhm.
But in the short term, you can just start in the pasture you got and start turning the soil around quick. And like I said, with that USDA study in Texas in 2011 showed a 50% reduction immediately in runoff with contour ripping. If you have 1,000 acres upstream of the village and the village is in danger of flooding and the wells are drying out, go pattern rip it. If you have a rip sower, all the better, and you can effectively plant the high plant diversity, which is one of those inviolable components of deepening topsoil and harvesting deep water and minerals, do that. So to his point though, or the questioner's point, it's that the keyline sequence is also very specific. I showed a sequence where we were going deeper each time, that hand-drawn sequence. That's really important. That is the keyline sequence, is that each once a year you go deeper each time.
Mhm.
And when we use the biostimulants, the other fertility, and the seed, you can go a little bit more deeper each time, like 4 inches instead of 2 inches. So the minimum starting depth for a good finish, because you don't want the surface to be all broken and chopped up, is about 10 inches generally. And in the proper soil moisture conditions, like not too wet where you're just smearing through, and not too dry where you're causing massive clods and disruption. But it's a sweet spot. Although we do it plenty in really dry conditions because we're in really dry conditions a lot these days. So it's incrementally deeper each year. That is the keyline sequence. Type in P.A. Yeoman's keyline, The Challenge of Landscape, Water for Every Farm. All of these books are free online and read them. They're they're canonical. We have to read these and be for us to be knowledgeable and useful to our communities. To not know this keyline information is really a liability.
Awesome. And I will, for those of you listening, I will include those links on that Facebook group. So if you want those or didn't catch it when Abe answered. Okay, Doug is asking, what is the best way to find ground truthing crews in the local areas? In my case, Chicagoland, Illinois.
I love the question. Um, we You need to create them
Mm.
and you need to hire the training. The science that we do is the science of environmental biophysics. We're working now with Cornell, with conservation districts of establishing ground truthing crews and applied environmental biophysics curriculum. It's a super rigorous environmental science that is largely unknown outside of a small group of advanced earth scientists who developed it, and it's verified. I mean, there's no question. It was ready to go in service to humanity for feedback 25 years ago, but it just never made it out of academia, except for small little fingers that you see. There are important fingers too, like the most advanced drought monitoring in the United States is based on the Alexi dysalexi uh, model that's measuring energy and water from space. So that's a atmosphere land exchange inverse model, or the disaggregated smaller resolution version of that. Those are all examples of outcomes of environmental biophysics. 3D soil mapping came out of environmental biophysics, et cetera, et cetera. But for you to have a ground truthing crew, I'll tell you how it's rolling out. It's evolving here. Is we've just been out there doing. You saw my colleague Eliza like leading crews of people making measurements. Like I started that. The one of the fathers of environmental biophysics is Dr. John Norman, who's given himself to us for the last decade without accepting a dime, which is amazing. It's like getting Einstein. I'm a dairy farmer and I'm just like calling up the best scientists in the world and saying, we're doing this thing and wondered what you thought. And he said, I'm going to help you. And he's given us his retirement, which is incredible. I mean, it's one of the great sacrifices in history. I mean, he could be, feet up on the beach, but instead he's helping us grind through crazy equations. So, point is, applied environmental biophysics curriculum, we need to start training students in it at the high school and college, undergrad and graduate levels. And ground truthing crews, we've begun training people in the conservation districts. So the conservation districts in the US, NRCDs, they're like the most democratic version of the NRCS, established what, 60, 85 years plus ago, going on 90 years, to bring conservation from the US government down to the community level. Because you can't just have a top-down program and think it's going to work. So almost every county in the US has a conservation district. And what we're doing now is training personnel within those conservation districts to make these kind of environmental measurements, the soil mapping, the other instruments we invented, the standard instruments that are used worldwide for the highest order scientific measurement of Earth systems were invented by John Norman, and we had to invent a few more. That was 5 years of my life. I'm a farmer, remember? And I was just locked in a shop just building these instruments that we had to have in order to do this. So, point is, it's going to take capital, it's going to take people. You have the very powerful potential asset of conservation districts, but basically organize yourself and begin training through the curriculum that we're developing with Cornell and others of implied environmental biophysics, and equip yourself and get trained to do the field work. And I would say also, you're going to create a data cooperative. So the farmers aren't going to be isolated, fragmented farmers who have no real data power. Because data, the exhaust vapor that you leave when you use Google, you notice that Google makes a fortune on that, selling behavioral futures. They can predict your behavior. But it's not just you, it's you and 50 million other people. You have very little legal right to that data. It's not until it's aggregated, analyzed, and done something with that you have legal and possible monetary benefit from it. Data cooperativism is one of the key take-home lessons that I hope people think of, that do not impose on farmers continuity of the same old line
I'm sorry.
of you're a by yourself and you have data privacy and everything. You don't. You have no power if your data is just you. It's when your data is aggregated with other farmers, including all the advanced science and your very specific management data, which our cooperative has software that we've been building for years on, very powerful software that's not just helps you with regulation and certification and actual farm management, but also helps you with the learning. It's part of a learning system. And in that learning system, you're in a data cooperative so that you, to say it, you own your data as an organization. Help people create data cooperatives, work with NRCD. Yep.
Okay, and so then practically, let's say you have somebody from the conservation district, can they come to you? Or is that like how does that start, or just reach out, communicate
And
in that
they can
conversation?
come to us and we can figure it out. You know, we're figuring this out as we go, to be frank. But bottom line, there's just a couple of us working our tails off. I mean, the cooperative, the science, all of it, we're pretty busy. So you're going to come to us. And right
Yeah.
now, we have people from universities coming to us. We have the conservation districts right around us that, my colleague Eliza is out training a conservation district today. So you're going to have the will, then you're going to find the money because you have to hire us, right? We have to do this. You have to get equipment,
Mhm.
and then we have to model. It's not modeling, it's measurement synthesis, but we have to take your data and assimilate it, synthesize it, and make it meaningful to you.
That's simple, huh? That is. Okay, great. Priscilla is writing in from Kenya and she is asking or saying, the contour rippers, how does it avoid soil compaction by, oh, I bet it's tires like TIRES.
Yeah,
TY.
yeah,
But then,
right. So there's the tractor tires, and then there are the wheels themselves, which are the depth control on the rip sower, and those cause down pressure, which packs soil, no question. But we're also ripping underneath the tracks of those tires on the tractor and on the wheels. So there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with deflating your tires on a tractor or on any implement to the maximum possible softness so you have the largest surface area. But overall, what I can tell you is the net effect. So if you have a very hard piece of ground and you pull a rip sower across it, you have thousands of times more oxygen in that air, in that soil after you've passed, and it is fractured and loosened now. It's like the saying, it takes money to make money. It does, yeah, there are isolated instances of compaction underneath tires and so forth, but there are also numerous ways to get that. And I'd also offer that a lot of advanced research has been done on this. And litter is almost everything. So litter meaning plant matter on the surface of the soil. When there is litter in contact with the soil, typical tractor pressure under normal growing conditions with adequate moisture and plants growing and so forth, that litter is constantly being pulled, decomposed by fungi, springtails, mites, earthworms, we could go on, and eaten by bacteria. And it's the micropores that create that, and sometimes macropores, if it's earthworms, that are created by all those organisms. If you have the litter, you literally soil from normal pressure tire on a field will be undone within a matter of weeks. If you don't have the litter, it remains unchanged. So these are all, it's a super nuanced dance and it's a good question, very insightful, but it's also the net effect
worth
by
it.
and large is massive,
Bottom line.
massive compaction.
Yeah. Okay. Emma is asking, you talked about rip sewing. If you don't have money for fancy equipment, is it possible to do it using low-tech handheld tools?
The broad fork is a common tool in gardening. Broad fork that you jump
Mhm.
on and has deep, hard tines and you lean back and it just shatters. That's an example. And please understand me, if we didn't have to use the rip sower, I would love it. The less heavy equipment and diesel, the better. However, given the pickle that we're in, the ability to decompact soil and transform subsoil into topsoil, and there's abundant scientific research on this and abundant farmer experience, it's transformational. So the broad fork with adequate fertility, with biostimulants, with highly diverse plantings is a powerful tool. One way to think about it is like, let's say you have some bare, sick ground. Take a soil sample, and depth matters, as you could tell. The old short and shallow paradigm is short grass grazing, this to this to this to this, and short rooted. In fact, the old thing was you don't need to sample any deeper than 4 or 6 inches because that's where all the roots are.
That's great.
Well,
You haven't earned it. You haven't earned to even be able to like see what's under there, you know?
that's right. That's in that worldview, and that all goes hand in hand, but it doesn't reflect reality. Um, where was I going before I got off on that?
I'm sorry.
Um, uh, Point being, broad fork
Oh,
plant crops, I would rather not use a subsoil if I couldn't, if I didn't have to. But yeah, for someone on the ground, a broad fork, mineral diversity, biostimulants, and high plant diversity, that bare soil that you started with, if you brought all these things together, as long as it's not poisoned by gasoline or something like this, right? You can shatter the soil. You can have the fertility to grow the plants that'll come from the jump start with the minerals you bring in. And the plants, again, going back to the English lay farmer William Laws, who said that, or was that Robert Elliott? I forget. Our job is to permeate and disintegrate the soil with vegetable matter. So you can imagine that soil that was just a block of concrete with barely any air or any water in it is now loose and fragmented. The roots grow into it and they permeate the whole thing, and they're pumping all those great exudants, and the organisms are following them. And you could turn that bare soil, which may not have barely any organic matter, into, in one season, you can transform that 10 by 10 plot.
great. I'm sorry. I've just now got, I'm like, wait, where there's no way we're gonna get to everything. And even the things like the dams, like, make sure you talk about this. I'm like, we're never gonna get there. We're gonna keep cruising through these because I love it that people are writing in. So Donald is saying, I am from New Zealand. I'm not a farmer, but I understand that currently our dairy farming is throwing huge nitrogenous fertilizers into our soils and in the process threatening our waterways purity. If you are in contact with any of our farmers, oh, can you please spread your good work? So I think it was more of a like, thank you so very much. We recognize the problem here and would love for you to connect. And, we have people, like I said, joining from all over the world. So I think probably connections are going to be made. And yeah, so that was more of a like, thank you. And move on to this one. Megan, hello. What would be your suggestion for starting a conversation about this with your local government? And what are the greatest challenges you have faced as far as legislation goes? Have you worked on like the political side with some of these ideas? Okay.
We are, and we're often frustrated because there is a gatekeeper class who are loath to let go of their historical control. If government everywhere is the same, there's enormous amounts of corporate and oligarchic capture of government. And we have aristocrats at every scale, including here in Vermont. Um, but the good news is that there's people power. And if so, I would say don't go by yourself. Organize, organize, organize with your farmer and community friends and neighbors, and say, we want the chance to, hey, our community is enduring drought and flood and farm loss and the downtown shuttered. We could go on, right? And poverty and the violence, the social violence, within families, that even within families, that results from poverty and that level of stress, et cetera. We have to do something. We want to do a pilot project, and that pilot project, we're going to need capital and knowledge and our science, and we're going to determine the science. And it's advanced, rigorous science that exceeds the standards of much of what passes for environmental science these days, because so much of the science is about prediction. A lot of the science that we're surrounded by today basically said, we want to figure out if one researcher did this trial on this practice, on this soil type, we can now extrapolate it via policy to 100,000 or 1 million farmers doing that. And so it's prediction for convenience, right? So that way you don't actually need to do all the complexity of measurement. Rather, you just say 100,000 farmers implemented this practice. We can now claim this phosphorus credit or whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, go organize with your friends and neighbors, get some seed money somehow, at least pay for gas money to get to the state house. But when you go, show up. So in other words, work with existing organizations, which are out there in abundance, and say, it's time for us to pilot what it's going to take for us to leave ourselves and our kids a deep soil watershed.
Great. I love that. I think it even goes back to what you were talking about is it's in the community already, like just one farmer trying to do something. Anyway, it's all circling back. That was great. Emma is asking, have you experimented with adding inoculated biochar to the land?
I love biochar, and I think that inoculated biochar is absolutely a viable framework. I have close friends and colleagues who work a lot with it. Um, this is not biochar. We use a lot of wood ash in Vermont. It was a byproduct of wood burning power plants, and they make a high carbon version of that, which is a lot of charcoal as opposed to just ash. But no, I have not personally. I mean, I've studied terrapretosols and biochar, for 30 years now. It's just in the arm length list of things. I've never had my own retort. And in fact, I've worked with ranchers and farmers who make their own, including in the Sonoran Desert, in giant earthen retorts. But no, I haven't, but I have, it's of course not just for the opportunity to create the terrapretosols, like these long-term ancient high carbon soil, deep high carbon soils, but also the incredible ability of biochar to clean pollutants, to bind and degrade lead and fossil fuel, gasoline, kerosene, pesticides, microplastics, et cetera, et cetera. It's a powerful tool.
Yeah, it's kind of reminded we haven't arrived yet. Like, right? Like we have this process. We're always learning. There are other tools. Yeah. Okay. Please, what are the 3 components and ingredients for topsoil and biodiversity, if they could possibly be narrowed down to?
I won't try to
Won't
do
even.
that.
Okay.
No.
Can you give an example of your process in a brittle environment? Where might there be examples in the Western US?
So many powerful examples. In Australia, as an example, there are Dr. Christine Jones has done so much work with so many people across Australia, as an example. The Haggertys are broad acre farmers. They're tens of thousands of acres that they're farming, and they have transformed just wasteland, clay pan kind of land into, they grew the crops and used like earthworm castings and other biostimulants as they're planting the cereal crops, and rows of perennial native grasses that hadn't been seen in 50 years just show up in stripes. Pasture cropping, plant grazing. I mean, despite the resistance of the range management community to holistic management, so many powerful examples. With ripping, with ripping in context, right? With everything else I was describing, like the subsoiling type stuff. Gosh, there's so many examples where ground is just transformed. And really, I know it's kind of a harsh thing, but in a way it's like a defibrillator, like big electric paddles that just shock someone back into life, because soil without oxygen is not functioning. And like I said, ultimately it's biology that does the work of structuring soil. But the fact that we can take absolutely compacted ground and wake it up like that. I've seen some, who was it? Owen Hablutzel, probably 10, 15 years ago, took hundreds of acres of abandoned cropland that was just like playa, just like flat clay pan done, and just ripped it, nothing else. And a giant rainstorm came out of the mountains and just flowed across it and sunk straight in. 100% cover, obviously with low successional plants in the beginning, but it radically reduced the salt levels in those soils, which had been salted up through irrigation and bare cropping. That example from decades of probably 10, 15 years ago, rather, that was a good example. Um,
Well, and we have the Haggertys are queued up to be presenting within the next few weeks, so that'll be a really fun follow-up to what you've been.
Amazing. I don't know personally the Haggertys, but we have
Yeah.
mutual friends, and I consider them some of the courageous heroes of transforming brittle environments in a way that makes them money as broadacre croppers too.
Great. Doug is asking, saying, Abe, fascinated with your commentary on colonization approach to moving people off the land to save it. Can you point towards a bit more resource or expand on that?
Yeah, it occupied way too much of my life, especially, and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying
Yeah.
we founded an organization called Carbon Farmers of America in 2006, I think. And our notion was very different than the carbon offsets and financialized nature that have followed. In fact, but what I got this front row seat to, and who's really suffered the brunt of it, are land-based people in the global south. Fortress conservation is well written. You can read Bram Buescher and others about the history of this, that basically the departing empires said, oh, but we're going to hang on to these safari parks. And oh, we're going to kick you all off and we're going to save nature. And they collapsed. I mean, you can read about that in the holistic management text, but you can, what's the one called? The one website or blog or something is, I think it's Red Watch, REDD Watch. And that has fascinating weekly commentary. But the unfortunate hard truth is that, I mean, just type in carbon offset scam and you'll have a month of reading. And it's from The Guardian and from internationally renowned watchdog established organizations, economists, etc. But the people of the global south on the land have been subjected to this. Oh, put we're going to encumber your land with carbon offsets and we're going to do tree planting or low smoke stoves, or and it's just been scam after scam. The fact that the entire complex, deceitful complex, is standing is a miracle after all that scandal, but it points to the power of PR. If you've watched like the show called Mad Men where they learned how to market cigarettes, right? It's the lessons are well known. What happened, it's against indigenous people and the poor in the South who have been nailed. Vermont was a first world testing ground. Over the last 5 years, we were subjected here because, like, oh, this is progressive. We're going to save nature by bringing all this to bear here. So we went through an incredible process of a farmer-led project for landscape feedback to heal watersheds got turned into payment for ecosystem services, carbon offsets, phosphorus credits, all this stuff. And so just go look up payment for ecosystem services, carbon offsets, put scam after anything, and you'll really filter your answers.
Okay. Oh, great. Tom is writing in. He says, I am a small holistic grazer near Quincy, Illinois. What are some practical ways to establish plant diversity in my pastures, and what forbs can be established by frost seeding?
Uh, the easiest forbs are the easiest forb in the world is red clover, which that is a forb. A lot of the other forbs are very challenging to establish. Plantain, I would say, is your next best bet. Lance leaf plantain. It's an incredible low successional. I mean, it's low successional and it establishes easily even in degraded soil conditions. What was the rest of the question? Best to frost seed?
Oh, practical ways to establish plant diversity, and he was just wondering about which ones are most easily done by frost seeding. So,
Trample grazing. We as grazers, it's not uncommon to create bare spots, like around a water trough or whatever, and getting making these high diversity mixes and bringing those out there and just broadcasting them out and having the cattle trample them in. That works well. We've had lots of farms had very good success with that.
oh, that's a great idea. That's one I hadn't really thought of. Okay, let's see.
Burr.
Turning, you're doing great. I'm not envious of you of like, okay, but turning a compacted field with grasses and short-rooted wild plants to vegetable growing. Oh, so Katrina must be saying, I'm doing this. What's the first thing I need to do? And I know you weren't really talking about, yeah, vegetable farming per se. Go ahead. Compacted field grasses.
Well, you're gonna all of those factors that I listed, fertility, compaction, competition is enormous, and that goes to the last question as well. How do I get things going like a dense sod, a cool season grass and legume sod? Competition is hard to get new stuff established in. When you're growing vegetables, the idea is a weed-free seed bed. I would offer, I'm sorry, I know we're very close to the end, but
Oh, yeah.
can I peel for one moment?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we have just a couple of minutes left, a couple of more, maybe one or two questions popping up. But yes, and this is how I feel after every session. And unfortunately, I'm the one here hosting this. It's just like there's not enough time. There are so many questions here. So I hope that one of the big takeaways is to work within your community. And I would say that, Abe, as well as many of the other presenters, are open to, people reaching out, carrying on these discussions. Also, I'll encourage people to, not that I'm promoting the Facebook page, but it is a place that we have, that people can join and continue some of these conversations. So I'll be updating that site with, of course, the recording, and then some of these resources that Abe has talked about, and also reference maybe some reading materials and such. So that's a good place to keep some of these conversations going. I was just apologizing, Abe, that how I feel after every session is like there's not enough time. Like there's so many things, and your experience and your knowledge is just, we could have, like I said, each of your slides I feel like could have been an entire session. So just that little apology from my end of not being able to cover everything, but also realizing we can't. Like there's just no way we're going to be able to do that. But one thing that Dan was talking, and you briefly mentioned, we have just 2 minutes here. We had a question and then somebody revoked it and said, wait, we want to know what Dan wanted to ask. So I want to bring it back to the calcium silicate that you have. One thing I kind of think about is we can recognize there's a need for a resource in our community, and then often the resource is there. Like here in Colorado, we have gypsum mines. And, they always say, you don't need to add calcium, you don't need to add gypsum to the soils. But I'm like, but when we do, and it's right here, we see incredible results. So could you, in 2 minutes, tease us with a little bit of how that journey has been and what you're finding?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I wish we had some gypsum mines here. It's over 500 a ton currently in Vermont, 500 a ton, plus delivery.
Yeah. Used to be able to go get a bucket full, and now they're like, now you have to get a semi. Anyway, I'm not gonna.
The calcium silicate was a mineral that just, the Bionutrient Food Association, Dan, and so many others, we over the years, I mean, friends and colleagues of mine have included Jerry Brunetti and Dan and Bill McKibben and others who are just so knowledgeable about refined mineral applications. And, I studied everything. I mean, minerals are just, one of the absolute legs of this 13-legged stool. Um, and uh, calcium silicate, we want silicon. We know that there's massive quantities of it underfoot, and yet there's very little that's plant available. Orthosilicic acid is the form that's taken up by plants and has just such tremendous benefits, including increased uptake of all the other minerals. It's very catalytic. It's a cofactor in a lot of stuff. It's like a central atom in a lot of stuff. So I wanted it. We used I routinely use the soil tests from Logan Labs, which are the Malic 3 plus paste test.
Mhm.
Paste test is water extractable plus Bill's Rex. And Bill and I are on the phone often, working through stuff. Recommendations by Rex.
Oh, yeah.
And so we work through these. I used to do all this work myself. I learned all that, sufficiency level and Albrecht and base saturation and all the ways of looking at it. And I never got too stuck in anything. I needed results. I needed to grow plants to transform subsoil into topsoil and for yield as a farmer and working with farmers. So I used to do it. Then I started working with Bill McKibben a lot, and boy, he could do everything I could do 20 times faster and 10 times better. So I just go with him. I wanted calcium silicate, and I was going to have to import it from internationally or from New Mexico. And so I started looking, and I found a mine that had it. And we've been working as a cooperative. Now our cooperative offers it for sale. Like I said, it's been a lot of work and we're still ongoing, but we're able to offer it for about a tenth of the cost that it was available even a year ago. 1/10 of the cost. And we're applying it commonly 300 to 500 pounds per acre, and it's slow release. This winter, we're doing major trials where we're putting it into our manure at pretty small rates. And so the acids in the manure exuded by the metabolic byproducts of the bacteria basically add up to converting. The hypothesis and the literature show that it converts it to orthosilicic acid. So when we spread our fermented compost in the spring, we'll be spreading orthosilicic acid, which is, if I buy orthosilicic acid applied at like a pint per acre, it's about $100 a quart. But we're just going to be taking a raw mineral that's very, very much cheaper than that
Mhm.
and adding it to the manure to make the orthosilicic acid and just spread it on the land that way. So it's available. Contact me through my email to it if you're interested in it. Like I said, if you're within, I don't know, 150 miles, we can get it to you for under $100 a ton, which is incredibly cheap to get a mineral this powerful.
Oh, yeah, that is incredible. And I don't like being the one now to have to end this, but I do have to end it because I appreciate your time. This has been wonderful. Again, we're always left with more things to think about and more questions, but thank you so much for your time. And
Thanks,
hope
everybody.
to see you in Middlebury. I'll be back soon, so that'll be fun.
I enjoyed seeing everybody. Bye.